the term fractional to me is imbued with so much more meaning. There's fraction of time, fraction of cost. If anything, it just helped me settle into my identity more. Like this just felt like the fastest way to express my years of experience, my strategic thinking, and the fact that I can work really fast and absorb information quickly. And so the term just resonated with me. Solopreneurship doesn't mean you operate alone all the time. You can choose when to be bigger than yourself, but it is a strategic move.
Fractional is where you can learn from top consultants in AI, software engineering, growth, and design. In this episode, we talk to Rachel Gogel. Rachel is a Parisian creative director, speaker, mentor, and educator. She runs her own consultancy as a fractional design executive. She's led major brand initiatives at GQ, the NYTimes, Meta, Godfrey Dadich, Airbnb, and Dropbox. As a solopreneur, Rachel has been launching editorial publications from scratch, leading org design efforts, designing TV show pitch decks, and building brand systems for global media and entertainment companies. Rachel teaches in the Masters of Interaction Design program at the California College of the Arts and runs the Women in Leadership and Design Initiative as chair and AIGA SF board member. She has been recognized by Inc. as one of 2016's 30 Under 30 Movers and Shakers and by Forbes as one of 2015's 30 Under 30 in Media. In this episode, we talk about the moments in time you decide you go on your own, why the term fractional resonated with Rachel, why relationships are the best way to get clients, the benefits of tracking your time, how to speak at conferences, and insights on building your personal brand. This is Alexis, your host and co-founder from Swarm. Thanks for listening. Hi Rachel, welcome to Fractional.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, and for everyone listening in, Rachel is an absolute superstar. She's done it all. So Rachel, I don't want to spoil anyone. Can you please introduce yourself to everyone listening in?
Well, thanks for having me, Alexis. It really means a lot. My name is Rachel Gogel. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a Parisian creative director, designer, speaker, mentor, and educator. And my career has actually followed the rise and dominance of an entire era of digital design. I'm currently based in San Francisco. I run my own small consultancy as an independent design executive, and I've led major brand initiatives across various publications, GQ, the New York Times. I moved out here to work at Meta. I was at a small design studio called Godfrey Dadich Partners, and I've worked with clients as a consultant, such as Airbnb and Dropbox. So I am now a solopreneur. I'm glad and happy to be on a podcast called Fractional because that is a term that I am using a lot in my practice today. And I've been influencing projects that kind of run the gamut across different types of work, everything from launching editorial publications from scratch to leading organizational design efforts to designing TV show pitch decks and even film posters, and then all the way to building brand systems for global media and entertainment companies in a fractional capacity. I do a lot of other things, which I'm sure we'll talk about today a little bit, but I'm an adjunct at a university out here called California College of the Arts in their Masters of Interaction Design program. And then if I'm not doing that, I tend to spend a lot of time volunteering and mentoring. One thing I'm doing right now is I sit on the board of directors for AIGA San Francisco, and I run a program called Women in Leadership and Design, which the acronym is WILD, which how can you not want to participate in something like that?
I want to be there.
Yeah. But it's been great. I'm still learning. I know you started off the podcast saying I've done it all. I don't feel that way. I still have a lot of dreams and ambitions, and I'm still learning a lot. So just happy to chat through a lot of this stuff with you today.
Whoa. That's the initial reaction. I mean, that was my initial reaction just looking up Rachel. So before going independent or being a
Hmm.
solopreneur? Like you were at these top companies already. What persuaded you to make this jump?
It's a great question. Um, so I would say I'm someone who has been wanting to do something on their own since college. It was probably something that subconsciously was even on my mind before that. My both of my parents have entrepreneurial spirits. I have always, if I think back to even like high school, I was very active in certain communities and leading, like the yearbook club and things like that, be part of debate. I don't know. It's funny to think back. But if I think of even just the traits that I had as just in terms of my personality, it was something that followed me into college. And then when I was there, I think in the back of my mind, even though I knew that I wanted to get a job in various types of places in order to learn from other people, I would tell myself, okay, one day I would like to do my own thing or run my own studio. My ambitions definitely changed, but I graduated during a recession, which is worth noting because I actually couldn't get a job, and I dabbled in freelance at the time because honestly, I either couldn't get interviews or just wasn't able to get to a place where I was working in an industry that I wanted to work in. I really wanted to work in magazines. I was committed to trying to get into that as soon as possible, but I couldn't. So I started interning in fashion. Actually, I was at Diane von Furstenberg's studio in New York, and I was on the design side in her marketing art department. I think that's also when I realized that every industry needs designers or needs
Oh,
design skills in some way.
why?
And
Why
I,
do you have that realization there?
yeah, I mean, I still wanted to work in magazines, but I think my mind just kind of opened up and acknowledging that every industry needed people who had my skills, and so maybe I shouldn't be so limited, or at least in my job search, this particular opportunity did lead to other doors opening that I didn't even realize. And so, even though this kind of happened because of the recession and it was the only thing I could get, but also I'm very grateful for that opportunity. And I met some amazing people and I learned a lot. Um, I had, I learned some valuable lessons. So during that time, I was applying to magazine jobs. I did end up working at Travel and Leisure magazine for a little bit, probably about a year as a junior graphic designer. Um, and so I just share this context because I knew I wanted to maybe eventually open my own studio. I had these big visions about, running a design shop. I had thoughts around the physical manifestation of what that could look like having a cool office space or whatever that is. And um, throughout my career, I mean, then I did end up freelancing and building relationships through various activities that I was involved with, including running a job newsletter for a few years. And I just met all these amazing people. And then I did end up at GQ, and that was probably the biggest catalyst, just because I ended up getting a title, associate art director, and I was still quite young, and I was running their design team on the marketing side, and that was a huge opportunity, and it definitely put my career on a faster track than expected. So I was in magazines and in publishing media for a good portion of my career. And I think those were moments where I kept asking myself as I was moving around, okay, is this the time? Like, should I go out on my own now? Should I wait? Should I keep getting experiences, and learning from other people?
I think I
Um,
remember you saying on another podcast that you got recently promoted, but then you wanted to leave.
well,
But
so it was more about, I think I had ambitions, or I had ideas for the company This was, I think, at GQ, if you're referring to that time. And I had all these ideas around bringing in more emerging technology into what we were doing. And at the time, maybe it just wasn't the right place, the right time. I think we had already invested in an augmented reality app and had kind of done that. And it was great for them. But I was hungry to do more. And I think I was too eager, or again, I think it just wasn't the right place, the right time. And I did leave looking for a place that maybe embraced that more, which was the New York Times. And I no regrets, and remained very amicable with my previous team at GQ. Sure. And then years later, maybe you're referencing this anecdote that sometimes I share, which is the publisher coming to me at a party saying, "Hey, when you had approached me about this idea, I didn't think it was possible, but you proved me wrong. And I'm glad to see you're doing well." So I think it was just, again, when you have certain ideas and ambitions, sometimes there are environments that embrace them. Sometimes maybe it's just not the right time. And it's up to you to figure out if you're willing to wait for that time or try it somewhere else. And for me, it just so happened that I then got another job. But I share these moments in time just because I've had multiple moments where I'm like, is this the time that I'm going to go out on my own? And then something will happen. And usually it's unplanned. And then suddenly I'm like, okay, wait, hold off. This is not the time. You still have more to learn. You shouldn't pass up this opportunity. And so that next time was when I was leaving the New York Times, and this was 2016 or so. I was actually going to go traveling. I love New York. I will always love New York, but I was tired. Had been an intense few years. I was working a lot. I had barely taken any time off after college. I just started working. And that was a moment where it was like two choices. Do I pack up my things and go traveling, or spend time in France, which is where I'm from? Or do I start my own thing now? And then the more I thought about it, I thought I would get stuck in, or I would get pigeonholed in just being the branded content or magazine person that people would go to. And then I thought that was too limiting. And I had this fear that, yes, okay, maybe this is a moment in time and I could do this kind of work independently. But what if this trend goes away, or I don't know. So there was something around this not being right at that moment in time. And then I got an email from Facebook around that time, and I ended up getting recruited, which is what moved me out here. So again, it put that idea on pause. And
once again,
yeah,
you got paused again.
Well, yes, exactly. I mean, I just that's where I think sometimes it's, you have these ideas and then you kind of have to go with the flow and then evaluate in real time, and weigh all of your options. Like, okay, if I move to California to work in tech, do I even know anyone in San Francisco? Which I didn't really. And this was a big risk. I never saw myself moving to California, let alone working in an industry that I had never worked in. But they wanted the skill sets that I, had gathered from all these years in media publishing, like telling stories, like building these cross-disciplinary teams. They wanted me to be able to do that within the Facebook app. But there was still a huge learning curve just in the act of working in tech and understanding how tech works, just from whether it's pacing or the language that they use to get headcount, or convince people of an idea to invest in. But I share, again, it's like these moments in time where I was like, is this the moment? Is this the moment? Is this the moment? And then I think when I was contemplating leaving Facebook, it was more around, I had only worked for mostly known like big brand, bigger companies in-house. And I had never truly just worked for a really small,
Like boutique
small
agencies.
company. Yeah, like that perhaps could give me more agency experience in the more traditional sense. And there was this studio that had been in existence, but was kind of going through a new era. There were all these people that were coming from publishing, specifically from Wired magazine, and going to this small design studio called Godfrey Dadich Partners.
I think it's the EIC, right? If I remember correctly, or
Of Wired, yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Scott Dadich, who's their CEO and founder now. Um, but I wanted to learn from them. I think I craved my people. Like I was missing the publishing type vibe. And I honestly, when I was leaving Facebook, I thought, okay, well, maybe I have to leave San Francisco. I don't know if I can find what I'm looking for by staying here. And this offered kind of the best of both worlds. And so I cold emailed them. I didn't know them. I didn't know any of them. And then one dinner led to an interview that led to just me eventually helping lead their design team alongside an amazing head of creative now, Ali Fisher, and also Scott Dadich was there and leading a team of great people. And then the pandemic hit. So I don't know. I mean, I wonder sometimes if I would have stayed there had the world not been overwhelmed with everything that was going on. And I definitely was, just on a personal level. I had some health issues pop up unrelated to COVID, but there was just like a lot going on in 2020 for everyone. And I had some more stuff kind of piling on top of that. And the job was intense. I did learn a lot, but we were really trying to not lay anyone off. And it was just a lot of hours. And I don't know. The slightly longer story that I feel like would be interesting for your audience is sometimes people ask me like, what do you need in order to feel confident to go out on your own? Like, do you need savings? Do you need like a certain amount of time that you're willing to give yourself? Like, and obviously it's very case by case, and some people can afford to take risks and some people just cannot. But in my case, so the idea of me going out on my own had been brewing again. Although, if you imagine, there's the backdrop of the pandemic. So you're like, is this really the right time to do this? I mean, that's kind of wild.
Possibly worst.
Yes, it potentially like not the best compared to past years. And so so it was brewing in my mind, but again, I was hesitating, and maybe I just shouldn't do it right away. But what ended up happening, which I don't talk about a lot, but I'm happy to, which is so I actually resigned from Godfrey Dadich to go to Netflix. So there was a period of time that summer of 2020 where I was essentially getting, which I feel very lucky, but I was getting courted by Netflix. I kept getting messages from a few folks there, and there was a lot of kind of back and forth around what kind of role would be right for me and what they were looking for. And eventually, like after lots of back and forth, I mean, really in my memory, I think it was about 3 months of discussing what could be. I really was hesitating because I did love, or I like really liked my job. It wasn't like I was unhappy or that I was actively looking to leave. So it just was this thing that was appearing. And we ended up settling on a job. I interviewed for that job. I had multiple interview rounds. I got the job. So I negotiated a salary. I signed my contract. We agreed on a start date. And I resigned from Godfrey Dadich with, essentially explaining that I was going to Netflix and it was this career shifting role. And it was a very amicable exit. They were very happy for me. I think they were hoping maybe we'd get to work together again, through me working at Netflix. And so 2 days before my last day, my would have been boss at Netflix got let go. And then, long story short, my role basically changed. It was not eliminated, but they demoted the role, they changed it. And then when I touched base with HR, they, essentially told me what the role was, and I said that's not the role that we agreed to, or that I, interviewed for, and this because you were in my interviews. So essentially, I negotiated a severance, which is kind of a big deal because first of all, I've never done that before. But in that moment in time, because I knew that legally I was an employee of Netflix, even though I hadn't started yet. And I could tell on their end, I don't think they were totally sold on the need for the role now that the boss had left. So there was just kind of a lot in the air, and they were happy to negotiate a severance. I got 6 months severance, which is not nothing if you know anything about Netflix salaries. And then that's actually the genesis of like me finally feeling confident to go out on my own. It's because I now had this money that Netflix gave me. I had, a little bit of, time now. I mean, I didn't go back to Godfrey Dadich, even though I didn't have a job lined up, but it was this weird combination of events that then made me feel like, okay, I should, prioritize my health. I should, make the time to do all of this, and then see where this goes. So that's what I did, and not too long after, I got my first client. I know your question probably wanted a shorter answer, but I guess the point here was to say it's not like one day I just went, aha, it's time. Like,
Yeah.
I've had this idea for a long time. There were many points where I thought I was going to do it and then I didn't. And then actually my ambitions of going out on my own changed. I currently no longer want the big studio with a big team. I am prioritizing and liking being a solopreneur. So just being on my own, being really agile. I don't have a physical space other than I rent a desk out of a design studio here in the Bay Area. So that
That's
I
cool.
have a mix of, just so that I'm not just working from home. But at least right now, that's my setup. It's been a few years now working this way. And I will just end by saying, being a solopreneur doesn't mean I have to do everything alone. Like there's a few projects that I'm working on right now with some friends and other independent creatives, and we're collaborating on projects. So
Oh yeah.
it's
I think
not like I feel alone or anything like that. Yeah.
on your article on women founders, I think you emphasize the need to build a network of specialized collaborators you can strategically partner with. And we
Mm-hmm.
believe in the same kind of uh, driving force behind going fractional or independent. Like, can you tell us a bit more about that? Honestly,
Sure.
that's really interesting. How do you find these? Like, it's like assembling your kitchen cabinet or like your Avengers, right?
Yeah. Relationships are everything. Whether you're looking for a full-time job or, being independent or working for yourself, because, in terms of the full-time jobs, people tend to, hopefully they want to work with people that they like, they respect, they're inspired by, and there's so much around, referring people that to an organization, if it makes sense. It's kind of the same idea with, you being kind of out there on your own. I think there's a mix of needing, uh, other people who can do similar things to you, and potentially creatives who can augment your skills with other skills. Again, this depends on the types of offerings that you provide to clients, because some people may want to provide more than what they can offer themselves, and some may actually just want to lean in to only their own capabilities. And I've seen both people who have brought in essentially collaborators who are basically redundant in their skill sets. And that's so that they have coverage and also have strategic partnership from someone who's just as knowledgeable. Yeah, so I met someone recently who literally just brought in someone so that they could take vacation or have a close partner and be able to take on more work that is within their skill set, and they're just doubling down on their particular expertise. And then I've met other people who gather other types of resources around them so that they can offer, wider things to clients. I'll just get very specific. Like if someone were to offer visual voice for clients or brand identity and they just do the visual part, they may just say, like, that's all I do. But in other instances, they'll say, I can do everything for you, visual, verbal, motion, sound, whatever. And then they bring in close collaborators to work on it. And so I find that really interesting. It really does depend on what you are looking for, what you're seeing in the market, what you're interested in taking on. And there's not one that's better than the other. What I like seeing in the industry right now is how many independent folks are experimenting with different models of working and then positioning themselves a certain way to clients in order to attract the type of work that they like. But I would say the relationships I foster and the people that I work with really are from just life, like whether past jobs or if I really don't know someone in a certain type of field, I'll definitely ask around and ask for referrals. But otherwise, it's former jobs, friends, clients, past clients, but people that I respect, people that I know I can speak to their work. And because if I'm going to go in on a project with someone, ideally I know what they can do. And look, if you are brought into a project where you follow your gut, usually it's pretty right. Sometimes you learn that you have different styles of working and maybe it's not the right fit. But yeah, there's so many different ways to collaborate or bring people along in the journey. And as we said earlier, solopreneurship doesn't mean you operate alone all the time. You can choose when to be bigger than yourself, but it is a strategic move. So yeah.
It's like for taking on more complex deals, you want to work with more people in order to accommodate more capabilities. All right, we are back. So Rachel, thanks for sharing your perspective on that, on finding collaborators, and essentially it's your freedom to choose what your strategy is.
Correct.
Considering like positioning yourself, right? Can you talk a little more about um how you find clients? And I've noticed that you've done like your dream list of clients and like have done personal reach outs, and as well as on your contractor wrapped 2023
Mm-hmm.
you've listed down several ways uh to get clients, like referrals, people from CCA, uh, and other areas. Can you speak to other people who might want to go into being fractional on what was that initial process of finding clients like for you and the positioning around it?
First, I think it's worth saying I haven't always used the term fractional. When I first went out on my own, I was using a different title, and I think I was met with more confusion than people kind of really understanding what I do. I've probably experimented with a few different ways to position myself, and only last year did I start noticing, mostly on LinkedIn, there were just a few people who were starting to reclaim that term for very seasoned, creative professionals. And when I started digging into it, I started to understand that in terms of where the term comes from, it's not a new term per se, but it was historically reserved for C-suite executives and, pretty much reserved in a certain domain in another industry, but less so maybe in creative or maybe in CMO land, if anything. And so it was just something that I wanted to try. I embedded it in my title, and I do fluctuate between saying independent design executive versus fractional design executive. And it depends, how I'm talking about my work and to whom. So I did want to note that because, well, I know this podcast is called fractional. It is a term that is still, some people are using it, and some of their clients are getting on board and kind of knowing what to expect from those people. But I'm still, even just a few days ago, I'm still seeing some confusion from people in our industry who are wondering if this is just another rebrand of freelance or part-time. And for me, it's different. I'm not saying that sometimes you can't use certain terms interchangeably depending on the context, but for me, freelance was something that I was doing earlier in my career. I'm not discounting it. I think a lot of people freelance, and to some people, they may perceive me as someone who freelances, but I am a full-time independent design exec. I run my own business. Using the term freelance feels a little bit outmoded or junior. And it's not something that I do on the side. It's literally my full-time, endeavor. In terms of the use part-time, that to me only describes a length of time. That's less of a title. You could say you're part-time somewhere. So you could be fractional and part-time. But the term fractional to me is imbued with so much more meaning. There's fraction of time, fraction of cost, hopefully fraction of being onboarded because you're so senior that you should be able to get ramped up more quickly than someone who maybe has less years experience. There's so much kind of implied in that term to me. So it was something that I identified with quickly. And then I had to basically find a way to educate or at least explain what it meant to me. And I do that on my website as a way to kind of, again, share what it means, not only for me, but also what you get if you were to work with me in this capacity. The way that I get work didn't necessarily change between me, suddenly starting to use that title. If anything, it just helped me settle into my identity more. Like this just felt like the fastest way to express my years of experience, my strategic thinking, and the fact that I can work really fast and absorb information quickly. And so the term just resonated with me. But yeah, in terms of like how I find work, it really is the relationships it builds on the last answer, which is, you trying to kind of figure out if based on your current community or network, if you can get closer to certain types of roles or jobs that interest you or that align with your capabilities. In terms of the types of fractional work, honestly, a lot of the types of roles that I want or look for don't get posted online. It's not like a job description usually. It usually stems from a conversation or me catching up with someone. And then somehow they mention something. And then I'm like, did you know that I can do this type of thing? And then it leads to maybe something else. So I share that because I would say so much of my work does come from just investing time in building and fostering relationships. So I have a lot of one-on-ones every week. I have a Calendly account to make it really easy to book time. I'm involved with a few mentorship platforms that have also led to some work. And I basically have a spreadsheet in like Google spreadsheet that tracks a lot of the people that I either who either work at companies that I admire, and then I try and catch up with them once every so often to just see if there's any work for me. And sometimes it leads to something and sometimes it doesn't, and it's just a catching up, and that's great. And sometimes I don't know if you've heard this before, but with some of my friends in the industry, we sometimes talk about how some of these conversations are almost like planting seeds that maybe lead to work that's like a year later.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to assume that there's some seeds that need to be planted for a while, and that it won't be immediate, and that but it's still a good investment because it could turn into work, but it would come later on. And the more you stay visible or stay top of mind for someone, which means that you're engaging with them on a semi-regular basis so that they remember that you exist and they remember that, in terms of the type of work that you do, or if you change the type of work that you do, you need to let them know. So you have to somewhat invest time in keeping certain people updated. And there's obviously a lot of different ways you can do that. There's email, there's LinkedIn posts, there's various social media platforms. I don't think there's one way to do it. I think it depends on who you are as a person and how easy and natural some of the kind of broadcasting nature of running your own business, in terms of self-promotion. For some people that comes easier. Something I didn't speak about, but I think is important, is I also do speaking engagements once in a while. And that's all me. Like, it's not like I'm part of a speakers bureau or have an agent. I just reach out to people and get on their radar. And the speaking engagements don't necessarily get me work, but they help me just remain visible. And I guess it just helps with my personal brand, per se. And all of those things really help me figure out how to get work, or, and I'm going to recognize, like, it's been a slow start to the year. And when I talk to other friends doing similar type work, there's been similar kind of dips. And part of running your own thing and being independent, there's obviously ebbs and flows, and that's just part of it. But between the economy and a few other things like layoffs and budget cuts, the type of work that I like to do maybe has been deprioritized, or people that I knew at a company are no longer there. I mean, there's just change happening, which meant that I also had to change some of my tactics for finding work.
Tell us about that.
Well, I guess it was me leaning into some discomfort, or just trying new things, like, tagging brands that I would like to work with, and just to see if anyone knew anyone at those companies. And again, just being vulnerable. Like, I don't know anyone at the WNBA, but I would love to do work for them. Like, does anyone know anyone? It also meant getting creative with different self-promotion tactics. So coming up with a way to specifically broadcast, the speaking gigs that I'm doing, or I guess for the speaking engagements so far for this year, what I really did was I looked up, the main design conferences or conferences that relate to my domain happening in the US and in Europe, mostly, some maybe outside of those two, and literally created a list and looked at the dates, and then tried to figure out if I had already missed the deadlines for, nominating myself to be a speaker, or if I knew anyone or whatever. And then I came up with a email outreach template to just put myself out there. And I emailed all of these, conference organizers, and I didn't hear back from everyone, but I did hear back from some, and it actually turned into a few upcoming engagements. So, like, I'm speaking at the Birmingham Design Festival in the United Kingdom in June. That wouldn't have happened had I not just cold emailed them. I don't know, I don't know these organizers. One of the organizers, we have followed each other on social media for a while, but still, I didn't even know he was involved. So yeah, so much of this is, I guess, being comfortable with trying new things if you do work alone, like in terms of, in terms of the self-promotion side of things and the outreach for work, you kind of have to, you probably come up with your own ways of catching up with people in the industry or friends. But for me, what I have found to be the most helpful is to carve out a certain amount of time per week to catch up with people in one-on-ones. And a lot of them are strategic one-on-ones, like, people who either work somewhere that could maybe lead to something, or it's just a good friend to have in the industry. I'm not saying that every meeting has to be transactional or that like it has to lead somewhere, but you're kind of thinking about all of these things and then weighing them as you make time for it. And then, like if your goal is to do more speaking, then you have to apply or you have to like
Yeah.
nominate yourself. You have to, I'm not full time on the speaker circuit. I'm definitely not known enough that I am getting a lot of inbound requests. And, I'm not necessarily known for my craft per se. I think I do a lot of different things. But I wanted to demystify that because I think sometimes there's this assumption like, that I'm getting inbound or that people are reaching out to me for work. And that's just not true. Like I'm doing the work to try and secure, more speaking gigs, more opportunities. And it does take a lot of time per week.
That's very vulnerable of you and admirable. And thank you for sharing.
Of course.
This makes people feel the discomfort, right? Like when they start being a solopreneur for the first time and they have to access different ways or modes of marketing that haven't been native to them at all. And you are like you're a Forbes 30 under 30 person featured under media and like and you feeling this, right? It speaks to how difficult it can be, I guess. So thank you for sharing that. Um,
Sure.
Something that caught my attention in one of the podcasts you were in was that you talked about the importance of onboarding. You specifically mentioned how to improve onboarding for contractors in design teams. Now that you're, like a professional consultant, do you feel like do people pay attention to these kinds of things, or it just comes more naturally to you as you've said earlier, it's easier to embed yourself into existing teams?
I'm more comfortable with ambiguity and I don't need as many things to absorb in order to get started. Now, that's not to say that it wouldn't be helpful to have more information, and because that will probably save time in other parts of the process. But whether they're able to provide references, or various documents for me to absorb, I just tend to be able to absorb things at a quicker pace and have probably fewer questions in order to get started. For other contractors who come in at various levels, look, I think it depends. There's still plenty of companies who don't treat their contractors like their full-time employees, at least in terms of how they onboard them on a team or at a company. And I do think that that is a miss because there are so many companies now who are building teams that are predominantly, with contractors, and there's maybe high turnover rate because, they're not treating them a certain way or giving them enough context so that they can be set up for success. And so they would probably save a lot of time if they, at least in terms of onboarding, as much as possible, like, depending on confidential information or whatever, like setting them up so that they have the same information and context for a project than if they were a full-time employee. So anything that person would need in order to get set up and have clarity when they're starting off on a project and make them feel welcome. Recently I heard this was an old student of mine who works at a company where she's the only contractor on the team and everyone else is full-time. And so in the day-to-day, she's just like anyone else. She's on the project. But when it comes to like cultural events, like doing an offsite and going somewhere, she gets left out. And I guess to me, that's just, if it's one thing, if it's one person, would it really have been that much more money wise to bring in my former student so that she felt included on the team? Or is it just literally just following protocol, like contractors don't do certain culture events, so she was just excluded and didn't think of like how that would affect that person's, I don't know, experience at the company.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's still a lot of room for improvement, and depending on the company, they care. Some of them care, some of them don't. I think there's a lot of work still needed in terms of companies acknowledging the new world that we live in, which is there's a rise in, creative entrepreneurs and solopreneurs, and a lot of people are contracting and working on projects in like a project-based basis. And so I feel like there should be some innovation in the onboarding space so that at least whether it's culture or some basics when you're getting ramped up or welcome to a team, that you're treated equally, because I do think that that would go a long way. Like anecdotally, when I was at Departures, that was my first client, and I was a fractional executive creative director, basically. I, for a while, was working with various contractors on the brand identity, and eventually some of them became full-time. But in terms of welcoming them to the team, even though, again, I was also technically a contractor legally, I was part-time and wasn't full-time at this company. I was the one responsible for creating the onboarding materials for anyone joining Departures. And so I treated them just like anyone else. And I do think it went a long way. And the whole team across the board, various functions across Departures at that time were not necessarily full-time on Departures, because we were basically building it from scratch or relaunching it anyway. And so it made a big difference for people to feel, just like treated with respect and getting access to materials just like anyone else. And I think that's just like a level of care and understanding and empathy that I just think a lot of companies, I think this is like an old school systemic thing that just has yet to change, which is like like back in the day, or, when contract work became more popular within the creative industry, I think it was an ephemeral, like they would kind of come and go. And so they didn't see the need for onboarding them a certain way because they felt like it maybe was a waste of time because they wouldn't stay that long. I do think depending on how long the contractor's there, you should evaluate what's worth investing in or not. Like if it's a 1 week project, that's one thing. If it's 6 months or a year, maybe that's another. And so I think, again, like coming up with solutions that, if someone comes in as a contractor for 6 months, that's basically a job with a certain term, and they're getting paid differently than a full-time employee and maybe have different benefits, but that's still a long time. And so you would probably want to set them up just like anyone starting, full-time. And yeah, so there's room for improvement for sure. I haven't heard many stories where, it's like they're treating their employees equally. And I wish that were the case. And yeah, the first point that you brought up around me not needing as much, it's like I appreciate being seen as someone who's part of the team, just like anyone else. And I would say I feel very grateful for my clients who have never made me feel like less than or inferior just because I was not full-time. And I don't know if that's something where I earned respect or trust or I asked the right questions so that I felt embedded quickly or not. I think sometimes certain contractors don't feel like they have the power to ask questions or have the power to have access to certain things, and they just don't know what to ask. And so they're like over there. But I, essentially join any project just like if I were full time. And usually, sometimes I get an email address, sometimes I'm on their Slack account. Like in the day to day, I'm just like any employee. I'm not, I'm getting paid differently, basically. So yeah, room for improvement for sure. And I really would love to see more companies experimenting with how to have their contractors or, any kind of outside consultant feel just like set up for success in whatever role that they're joining that company in.
What are some things that you wish you knew when you started out?
I just happen to be married to someone who's been doing this for longer than me. So I learned a lot through her, because she's very organized and on top of things. And so I started just kind of tracking my projects and invoices and contracts in a certain way because I noticed her doing that, and it helped me stay organized from the beginning. What I didn't do though was I wasn't actively tracking my time. So I was kind of being more organic around pricing, and it was my first year, and I had just left an agency context, so I had some context of what at least agencies were charging for someone at my level, and I kind of estimated what I thought something would cost, but it wasn't backed up by data, in terms of how much time I was actually using, and then on top of time, adding just like the value of someone who's been working a certain amount of years with a certain amount of experience. So it's like charging for value instead of just charging for time. So yeah, I wish I had started tracking my time earlier. I did start this year, or no, I started last year for most of my projects. And then I would say for this year, I'm tracking like even more things, like even some of the things that aren't necessarily client facing, but other passion projects of mine, or even class time, or all the prep that I do for school. Like I'm tracking that. And so I'm really trying to get more granular with how and where my time is being spent. And I do
Why?
recommend that for most people. I do think it's
why do you do this? Yeah.
Yeah, I think because when you're independent, time is money. But also, I do think it's important to know, if you are either undercharging or maybe in some rare instances overcharging, at least kind of knowing how much time you're spending towards a particular project. And sometimes there are a lot of clients who may want to understand, at least an estimate of hours for that project. And so you want that to feel somewhat, realistic, especially if you work fast or work a certain way. You may not want to reveal kind of, maybe it's more of a range than a specific amount of hours. But I do think that that kind of data is really powerful, as long as you build in reflection time and then you're able to compare. So yeah, I use a free tool called Toggle, Toggl, and it's really easy. It's just on your screen. You press play when you're working on a project, and then pause when you're done. And then you can have like a list of all your projects in different phases and whatnot. And then it has a dashboard that shows you kind of how and where your time is spent. I think also depending on how organized you are, like I use my Google Calendar with like color coded for different projects. But because you basically run your own schedule, and you're, depending on how flexible you want to run your day to day or how you set things up, I think it's important to know where and how your time is being spent. Because I think you can like tell yourself that you're spending a certain amount of time, but maybe for one project you totally over deliver and you way undercharged. And so you'll want to know and have that information. So that's probably one tip that I wish I had been more diligent about from the beginning. But at least I have data now. And I know you've mentioned my contractor wrapped article from the end of last year. Tracking the data is what helped me share some of that information, like, basically mapping my time within a Venn diagram and being able to tell people, consulting is actually not 100% of my time. I spend time doing all of these other things, and everything combined is my career. It's not just where I make the most money. It's, let's say consulting is 35 or 40% of my time, then, and teaching, I think is probably right behind that, like 25% or so. And then I do a lot of speaking and mentoring. Maybe that's split like each 15% of time. And then volunteering is 10% of my time. And as you can tell, like, there's some activities that are mostly pro bono or fully pro bono. And then I have various types of incomes coming in from some of the other initiatives or activities that I just named. But that is my career. Like that is where I'm spending my time, and I'm actively designing my time. And that's just what works for me. I mean, everyone will have a different Venn diagram in terms of what brings them joy or where they want to spend more time. That'll also help you charge a certain way, because if your goal is to not even spend 50% of your time consulting or taking on projects, then you probably have to charge higher. But it depends on your work and your level of experience or whatever, that you can kind of earn the right to charge a certain way. But that's, I think, what has afforded me the time to do all these other things, because, if I'm taking on big projects where I'm charging a larger amount, then that's obviously a big piece of my income based on my financial goals for that year. And so it allows me to do all this other stuff that I mentioned, which is a luxury. I recognize that not everyone can live and work that way. But yeah, tracking time for sure. Knowing, some of the basics around saving some money for taxes, depending on where you live. I get the question a lot around, did you feel like you should have incorporated earlier? I ended up forming my LLC in my second year, so in 2022. And had I done it sooner, I probably would have saved money in taxes. But I didn't know. And I also wanted to give myself a year without doing all the paperwork to just see if I liked being my own boss, in practice, if I felt like I was getting the right, the projects that I wanted, and that I could design a life that I was looking for. And so I gave myself a year before deciding, okay, let's like make this formal and actually move forward with an LLC. But I know plenty of independent people who are still don't have, are not incorporated, but it doesn't make them less of a business. I mean, in legal terms, maybe they're not, running a certain type of business, but in the day-to-day, they're still able to take on projects and do work similar to me. And so maybe at the end, it's just more of like how government sees them or how much money they're saving per year, depending on how much they make per year as well. So yeah, I would say time is probably one of the biggest ones, but other pitfalls, I mean, it depends on your personal circumstance. Like, let's say you're married to someone who works in tech, then maybe you can take a bit more risk. If you, in my case, I'm married to another self-employed designer. We had to kind of check in with each other. Is this the right time? Can we afford to live in San Francisco? How are we doing? So there's a little bit less stability just because we're both doing our own thing versus one of us having a stable job or a stable income. And then it really depends on your own ambitions financially and personally how you want to go about running your business. And it really does depend on the individual. So yeah, I don't know. The main thing that comes to mind is I wish I had tracked my time earlier, but otherwise I am in that unique position where I already knew that I should probably track certain things in a certain way because of my wife. Same with like having templates for things like my proposals and my scope of work templates and invoices and then even like using certain terms and conditions. So when we sign a contract that I am protected. And so I would say there are a lot of people who kind of go into this without some of those like core business documents to make it, to kind of cover themselves or have everything in writing. Whereas I started being really, committed to having those materials early. And I'm really glad that I did. So for those listening to this who may not have those things in place, I would recommend having them or starting them. And there's so many resources online to help you get started. But, the first thing is just to have things in writing. And then the second is, developing certain terms and conditions and contracts that feel like it benefits both you and the client. But you really should see yourself as, the more you treat yourself as like a serious business, the more you'll be seen as one. So it's one of those like perception things. Like you kind of have to act like a business and have the business related materials or ephemera in order to be treated as one and seen as one. And that'll also make you feel, even more, embedded kind of in the more professional scene. And maybe that's a big upgrade from some people who just do some freelance on the side sometimes to like, oh, like this is literally my livelihood. I probably should, have these things in place. And it may seem daunting to some creatives to do that, but you invest a bit of time at the beginning, but after that, it's kind of like you just have templates in place and the changes are minimal. So it's a worthwhile investment.
Golden advice. So the back office stuff, like the administrative stuff, is probably the most annoying part of being your own business as a creative.
Yeah, that and I get a lot of questions on health insurance, which you should definitely have health insurance, and there's many ways to do it, and it may seem expensive, but I wouldn't recommend to anyone to just not have health insurance because that is not wise. But yeah, there's so many things that you can set up, even a 401k, and at least for people who are in the US, like ways to set up your retirement and your future self or whatever that are similar to if you were full-time somewhere. You just have to do a little bit more work to set those up for yourself. Whereas usually when you're full-time, you just kind of do whatever the company offers and it's easy and you just like sign something and it's like happening over here in the background. But I don't know, I find it to be very empowering to kind of intentionally make decisions for myself and my future. And yes, again, it is work, and some people end up finding a co-founder or a partner who handles the kind of business side of things so that you can handle more of the creative stuff. But I enjoy doing both.
Hopefully all people enjoy it.
I would say that's probably an exception, but yeah. I use I pay for a service through a company called The Collective, and they helped me set up my paperwork for being an LLC, and they set me up in Gusto so I can have my own payroll. They set up a QuickBooks account so I can do accounting. They file my taxes. So I will just say, it's not like I'm doing it alone. I definitely have help, and they primarily work with small businesses or, self-employed entrepreneurs, and they're amazing. And it's a business expense. And so there's different ways to offset some of the things that may seem harder to do on your own. You just have to spend some time figuring out what you need in order to set things up a certain way. But yeah, it has been extremely helpful to just, there was a shift when I suddenly had an LLC and paid myself on payroll and like can see everything in QuickBooks. And it's not to say that I didn't take myself seriously the year before when I didn't have this stuff in place, but it was kind of this next level for me as a someone who launched their own business. Like it just made me feel more organized. It made me feel a bit more legitimate. There's just something in the act of doing all of this that not only hopefully just like sets me up for my future and setting this up in a certain way, but there was something in the mental shift too. To the clients, it's like not a huge difference. They're just paying me through my EIN and a different business account. But I don't know. There was just something for me that clicked. And so I just wanted to note that.
For people who want that similar click and want to get really serious and finally get super serious about their businesses as a solopreneur, that's the advice. And as a final word, Rachel, what do you want to say to all of the fractional people listening to you right now?
So I would say I'm excited that this term is gaining traction in the creative industry in particular. I still think that it requires some education or at least sharing about what that means for you to your clients so that they, there's no confusion. It's not for everyone, but I am excited that there's a term that's coming up that kind of helps name a certain level of experience and strategic thinking that's similar to how it was being used for C-suite executives. And so I think it'll be really helpful if more people use it, because not only will that term then require less explaining because it's more adopted in the industry, but I do think it'll help people move away from just using the term freelance, because that's a term that generally is understood. But I do think there are a lot of people at my level and above who are using the term freelance, who personally, I think, again, it depends on your own ambition, so I don't want to assume, but that it's devaluing what you can offer just by using that term. Like clients will immediately put you into a bucket of more supporting roles or more junior roles or production roles or whatever that may be. Whereas you may be seeking to be more of a thought partner and someone who comes in at a higher level. And I do think that the term fractional can do that for you. So it's a newish term. I'm glad there's a podcast out there that literally is called fractional, because to me, that gives me hope that like more people are using it, or at least understanding or seeing it out there. And so yeah, I guess I am hopeful, and it's maybe not for everyone, but I do think that there are a lot of people who aren't aware that this term exists, and I think could actually be a really good term for them to maybe give it a try and see if that helps them get the type of work that they deserve.
Amazing, and do a lovely chat with you.
Yeah,
Rachel.
that was
Thanks
really
so
fun.
much.